Texas Governor Rick Perry announced this weekend that he's doing what everybody already assumed he was doing anyway. He is running for president, beginning with the race for the Republican nomination. Rick Perry not just tiptoeing around about running, not anymore. Now he is officially campaigning for president the old-fashioned way by actually running. But if you want to find the real start of Rick Perry's presidential campaign, you might want to look here to his big book of big ideas, which was released in November 2010, just after the congressional elections. The book is called Fed Up! Because he's not just fed up with an M dash before the subtitle. He's not just fed up period or fed up space. He is fed all caps up, all caps, ! From page 49 of Governor Perry's book, where he talks about the New Deal, quote, certain of these programs massively altered the relationship between Americans and their government, violently tossing aside any respect for our founding principles of federalism and unified government. Limited government. By far the best example of this, he says, is Social Security. Social Security as a Molotov cocktail-throwing barbarian at the gate, violently tossing aside the founding principles of our nation. At least before he officially became a presidential contender, Rick Perry was very frank about his position on popular programs like Social Security and Medicare. Last week, the Daily Beast dredged up the outtakes from a Newsweek interview with Rick Perry that had been done last fall. These are the things that did not seem interesting enough to make the first cut of the interview before he was running for president. There's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of how these things go. Context is everything. But in the new context he is in of running for president, here's what he had to say. Quote, I don't think our founding fathers, when they were putting the term general welfare in there, in the Constitution, he means, I don't think they were thinking about a federally operated program of pensions, nor a federally operated program of health care. What they clearly said was that those were issues that the states needed to address, not the federal government. I stand very clear on that. Very clear. In Rick Perry land, so we are doing this by state by state. So Alabama, you can hand out vouchers for cat food and human portions. Massachusetts, you can continue on with pensions for seniors and universal health care, as long as you can afford it, even though it's always been a national safety net before now. Today, we got a hint that the Rick Perry who wants to live in the White House has begun to realize that his ideas on these things might not be all that popular. At the Iowa State Fair, the reporter Ben Smith from Politico.com asked Governor Perry about his not-that-old insistence that Social Security and Medicare should be abolished federally so the states can take them over. Any other solution, he says, is unconstitutional! That's his position as of less than a year ago in his all-caps titled book. But when asked about it today, all of a sudden, Governor Rick Perry did not sound so Rick Perry about it anymore.
I'm for having a conversation with the country about how we find some solutions to have programs that are going to be sustainable. And I think having the states doing it is one of the ways. I'm not saying it's the only way.
The old Rick Perry wants to talk Social Security as a violent overthrow of the Constitution. The new Rick Perry, who's running for president, wants to talk about sustainability and many ideas, not just the ones he demanded last year when no one was listening! In joining this race, Governor Perry brings some serious baggage, from his talk of seceding from the Union to his apocalyptic religious allies. But if Rick Perry does as well as a lot of people are now expecting him to do in the Republican nominating process, if Rick Perry is still in this several months from now, you will know that Democrats are winning against him if the race is not about religious convictions or social conservatism, but instead about Rick Perry's belief that Social Security and Medicare are unconstitutional and must be taken apart. Joining us now is Howard Dean, former governor of Vermont and former chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Governor Dean, thanks very much for your time tonight.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for having me on.
Governor Perry suggesting that Social Security and Medicare are unconstitutional. In addition to what I quoted in the intro, he's also called them a Ponzi scheme. This sounds to me like the same sort of Republican argument that's been a gift for Democrats all year. Do you see it that way?
This is going to be very interesting. Although the interesting thing about this, you'd think this might appeal to the Tea Party. The problem is he's got some other problems. For example, he talks a lot about the jobs that were created in Texas since he's been governor. There have been a lot of jobs created, but Texas created 3 out of 4 of all the jobs increase in the state workforce. State workforce up 18% under Rick Perry, the supposed Tea Party candidate. It's really extraordinary. And this business of allowing the states to do whatever they please, and if the state wants to get rid of Social Security, that's fine. But here's the record in Texas. 22% of all children in Texas have no health insurance. 22% is one of the worst in the country. So, he's got a lot to answer for. It's not just the stuff that he said that he's going to get in trouble for about Social Security and Medicare, which actually most Tea Party people do not think should be cut. He's got some fundamental problems with whether he really understands what the federal government is supposed to do.
I think back, though, on Bill Clinton running for the presidency in the early 90s and the criticism of him from the right being, OK, well, you seem like an interesting guy, a charismatic young governor who has a lot to offer in terms of the way he talks about the country. But look at Arkansas. Arkansas is at the bottom of the list at so many of these national indicators. Never really seemed like that stuck as a complaint against Bill Clinton as a charismatic governor. Can the complaints about Texas, both in terms of its economy and its lifestyle and the way that it fits into the country, really do Rick Perry any harm?
Well, I think it can. I think if people think the worst thing you can do in politics is be a hypocrite. And if you're talking about cutting the size of government and government's too big and we don't like Social Security and Medicare, and then you find that your own workforce has gone up by 18%, twice the rate of that private sector jobs went up in Texas while he was governor, there's a lot of explaining to do, as they say in politics. So I do think that matters. Jobs are going to be a big issue in this campaign. And if people think that he created jobs by expanding the state workforce, by the way, they have a $9 billion deficit, which is bigger than all but 4 states. In Texas. So they've got a lot of explaining to do, and he's got a management problem on his hands. Most governors don't have a management problem, but it turns out that Texas is the weakest governorship in the country. The lieutenant governor actually presents the budget in Texas. And Rick Perry really has very little management experience. He's not really running Texas. The governor of Texas doesn't really run Texas. It's the only state in the country that's true of.
There's been 2 sort of schools of thought, at least in the pundit world, about Rick Perry's entry into this race. One of them is that he poses potentially the starkest threat to President Obama. He offers a stark contrast and a style that's going to appeal to the Republican electorate in a way that will provide a real challenge for the White House. The other school of thought is that he's Fred Thompson, that he seems really exciting because he's had no scrutiny and that there's no reason to believe that he sees a path to the nomination. Do you ascribe yourself to either of those schools of thought?
Well, look, I think he could be a good candidate. He's a good politician, I think. He had terrible numbers the last time he ran than before this when he beat Bill White. And he still managed to escape in a 4-way race with something like 38% of the vote. This time he came back and beat a good Democratic, competent candidate. It was the mayor of Houston to win, although it was a very Republican right-wing year. So, look, I've said, and I'll say again, anybody that gets the nomination in their party, and I think he certainly could, can be president. So I wouldn't write him off. But he has a lot of explaining to do, as they say, because of his inconsistencies, because of his lack of real management experience, because of the size of the increase in his state workforce and how many jobs that accounted for, and because of the enormous budget deficits in Texas that haven't really been dealt with.
Governor Dean, as a former DNC chairman, how do you feel like Democrats in the White House are doing so far in terms of positioning the president for his run and also trying to turn out the people who are going to be most important to the success of the president's campaign?
Well, that depends on what happens in this debt deal, which has got a time bomb for everybody in it. If we, for example, raise the age of Medicare to 67%, I think the Democrats might as well mail it in because you got to stand up for core Democratic programs. This ought to be fought on 3 things. This race, jobs is the biggest one, and then Social Security and Medicare are the other 2, and we should win on all of those. The leading Republican candidates haven't really created any jobs. Except in the state government, in the case of Governor Perry. Michelle Bachmann certainly has never created any jobs and has taken a whole lot of federal money in some of her husband's and her business stuff. And frankly, Mitt Romney, with his experience, probably caused more jobs to be lost in what he did in Bain Capital than gained. And that'll all come out depending on who the nominee is. So if it's jobs, Medicare, and Social Security, we win. And those are really important issues to the American people. And I think we have a great shot at this election. We've got to stick to our guns and support these programs. You can't cut the daylights out of Social Security and Medicare and then expect the Democrats to rally around you.
Howard Dean, former Vermont governor, former chairman of the DNC. Governor, thanks very much for your time tonight. It's always good to have you here.
Thanks for having me on.
So actually restarting the economy is simple, it turns out. All we need, everybody agrees, is one lousy alien invasion, like from outer space. Sci-fi economics may be our best last hope. The evidence coming up.